Welcome to the B'nai Brith Canada Fireside Zoom chat, which is also being presented live on our YouTube channel at this time. I'm Aubrey Zidenberg, a volunteer at B'nai Brith for over 30 years, currently Vice President of B'nai Brith International for Canada, founder and National Chair of the Special Advisory Council to the League for Human Rights since 2004, and the police liaison for the organization. B'nai Brith, for those of you who are unaware, is the oldest Jewish human rights organization in the world, operating since 1843 and in Canada since 1875. These events that we are doing are part of a series done in conjunction with our League for Human Rights, which is comprised of over 35 committed liaisons to the diverse multicultural communities, the collective minorities that are the new majority, the new face of Canada. This advisory council has now been in place for 22 years and brings together diverse community leaders under the umbrella of B'nai Brith in an unbreakable friendship. As we always say, friends of the family that we choose for ourselves. For the last 11 years, I've also been the co-chair with the head of intelligence and organized crime of the York Regional Police Chiefs Community Advisory Council, ISCAC, the Integrated Strategic Community Advisory Council, and have worked closely with many other different policing organizations, both domestic and international. For those of you who are new to our fireside chat, please let me tell you about a few of our impressive past guests on our Zoom calls who have given us updates and insight into issues that impact our lives. Our guests have been former prime ministers, former premiers, award-winning journalists, leading bank presidents and CEOs, police chiefs, business leaders, opposition party leaders, federal and provincial cabinet ministers, hospital CEOs, and leading human rights activists currently battling global human rights violations all around the world. Tonight, our topic is foreign interference. We have a panel of 3 experts who reflect knowledge and expertise in specific areas that are and will be impacting our lives. Our format this evening is a 40-minute fireside chat with our guests that will be hosted by Austin Parcells, who is coming to us live from Calgary, who is our research manager at B'nai Brith Canada, followed by a 15-minute Q&A with our Zoom guests. All guests, not our speakers, all guests will be muted tonight, so once we begin, you must send any additional questions that you have through our chat features, and our host will filter through those questions that should be asked in the 15-minute Q&A period at the end. Let me now introduce our guests. Detective Sergeant John Khoshandish is a unit commander for the York Regional Police Tactical Intelligence Unit, leading intelligence development on organized crime and supporting national security, counterterrorism, and foreign interference investigations. He has advised our House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security and contributed to our National Police Training Standards through the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police Subcommittee on Foreign Interference. John holds a Master's in International Affairs, Cybersecurity from King's College London, and a Justice Studies degree from Guelph University. He further received advanced training from CSIS, the RCMP, the International Center for Counterterrorism, and the Asser Institute, a Center for International European Law in the Netherlands. Craig Jerusalim is a CFA. He's a Senior Portfolio Manager of Canadian Equities at CIBC Asset Management, where he is responsible for growth and dividend growth portfolios. He also oversees small cap mandates. Prior to joining CIBC in 2006, Mr. Jerusalim worked as an analyst at Dynamic Mutual Funds. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from McGill University and an MBA from the University of Toronto. Neil Bisson is the Director of Global Intelligence Knowledge Network and is a retired intelligence officer with over 25 years of experience in national security, intelligence collection, and law enforcement. He served with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, and the Canadian Border Services Agency, CBSA, specializing in counterterrorism, foreign interference, and espionage. He's a leading expert in intelligence analysis. Neil provides in-depth insights into global security threats, foreign influence operations, and state-sponsored espionage. Ladies and gentlemen, now I'm going to turn things over to our evening's host, Austin Parcells, to proceed with the evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Aubrey. Thanks to our guests for being here and to all the viewers joining us tonight on SAC-LHR's Fireside Chat, which is titled Power, Pressure, and Propaganda, Canada's Foreign Interference Challenge. My name is Austin Parcells, and I am the Manager of Research and Advocacy at Brith Canada, as you just heard from Aubrey. And we're having this conversation, I don't think it's lost on anybody, 6 days before Canadians go to polls, at a time when our institutions, communities, and public discourse are facing unprecedented levels of external pressure from hostile regimes and at times even from those who we've considered long allies. The goal of tonight's panel is to take a multidisciplinary look at how foreign interference plays out in Canada, economically, institutionally, and socially. Our panelists bring unique expertise from the worlds of finance, law enforcement, and intelligence. And this discussion is off the record. Audience questions will be collected through Zoom chat and passed to me by my colleague, Carter Lewis. So if you could please direct your questions in the chat specifically to Brith questions. I believe he just wrote in the chat, so that if you direct your questions there, they'll be properly triaged and seen, and we'll move to those Q&As around 7:40. So let's get into it. The way I've divided up these questions is I've started with sort of in segments. And the first one is sort of setting the stage with strategic interference and economic pressure. And the first question is from Neil. CSIS and Site Task Force recently confirmed that a coordinated Chinese state-linked campaign amplified pro-Carney content on WeChat, targeting Chinese Canadian voters. The narratives shifted tone and were amplified using dozens of smaller accounts. What does this operation reveal about the strategic goals and evolving tactics of Chinese influence in Canada's democratic space? And are we treating these acts with the urgency that they deserve?
Thanks for having me on. To start off, I think one of the most telling things about what happened with the WeChat operation is that China is still very much involved in and interested in influencing Canadian political landscape. We've seen through multiple disinformation and misinformation campaigns that China wants to do whatever they can to put themselves in the best light and to have influence over everything that's happening in the Canadian political environment. This includes trying to ensure that candidates that they feel would be more receptive to working with China and less critical of China are the ones that are chosen. We've also seen that China will put a lot of effort into trying to ensure that what they are trying to do becomes successful, whether that means pressure on diaspora communities or whether that means ensuring that bot farms are utilized to their highest potential so that this has an influence on the Canadian voter.
Thank you. Moving from China, who has been on people's radar for a long time and maybe moving closer to home now, Craig, this question's for you. Canada is currently facing aggressive tariffs, I should clarify, tariffs from a longstanding ally in the United States, introduced before a federal election while Canada has been going through somewhat of a diplomatic crisis. Well, this kind of economic pressure, whether by allies or adversaries, as Neil was mentioning, can significantly disrupt markets. What trends have you observed in Canadian equities in response to these kind of shocks, and which sectors appear most vulnerable to foreign economic decisions?
The easiest answer there is that markets, they thrive on certainty and they dive on chaos. And that makes perfect sense. If a company doesn't know what their cost base is going to be or the demand for their good, yet alone the currency or the interest rates, they're simply not going to invest, they're not going to borrow, and they're not going to lend. And when everyone does that all at once, from corporations to consumers, that's when you get economic slowdowns, and when exacerbated, ultimately leads to recessions. Now, a recession is not my base case at this moment, given all the off-ramps available, but the possibility is there. With respect to the stock market, the sectors that are most vulnerable include the manufacturers, the transport companies, but also those companies that have exposure to the domestic Canadian consumer, such as the telcos, the grocers, consumer discretionary stocks, or that have significant exposure to the Chinese supply chain. The good news for Canadian equities is that about 65 to 70% of the revenue generated comes from outside of Canada and will likely be worth more when translated back into Canadian dollars. Additionally, valuations that are always forward-looking are already incorporating a lot of the negativity. So the TSX is trading well below its long-term average price-to-earnings ratio, while the US benchmark, the S&P 500, even with its own correction, is still trading well above its long-term average. So Canadian equities are at least looking relatively inexpensive at this time, providing a nice margin of safety for investors.
Thank you. So we moved from China, foreign, to the United States, who's right next to us. John, a lot of what you do focuses obviously on domestic. Much of today's foreign interference operates in gray zones through protests, online influence, intimidation that would fall short of criminal thresholds. How is law enforcement adapting its tools, frameworks, and partnerships to address this kind of activity in a legally sound way?
Yeah, that's a big question. Hopefully, I can distill it into an easy answer for everybody. First of all, it's a real privilege to join you all to speak about what I believe is one of the most pressing and complex challenges facing democratic societies, and indeed law enforcement and intelligence services, the issue of foreign interference and transnational repression. Along with unprecedented speed and scale at which misinformation and disinformation is shaping public opinion and political discourse, not just in Canada, but more broadly across democratic countries. What we're seeing in York Region is not hypothetical. We already witnessed some astonishing consequences that are impacting our communities here in York. So the answer to the question, the best as I can, I'll walk you through York Regional Police is adapting how we are adapting to this threat environment, how we've built a framework to detect and disrupt foreign interference activity, and how we're tackling it locally in ways that we believe is making a difference. We're especially focused on that gray zone you mentioned, Austin, the space where federal threshold or clear-cut criminality might not be obvious at first glance, but where significant harm still occurring, and where intelligence becomes absolutely vital. I often compare it to the medical field. If a physician, for example, is faced with a complex condition, they don't rely on necessarily just symptoms or clinical examination alone. They order blood work, MRIs, CT scans, to make an accurate diagnosis before they can recommend a treatment. And frankly, that's exactly how we need to approach foreign interference: early detection, deeper analysis, and a clear path to some form of disruption would be what's necessary. At York Regional Police, you asked about the framework. So we have this framework in place now to specifically detect, triage, and respond to this gray zone interference. And central to that is our flagging system and escalation system. So the way this system works is every time we receive a report that may be linked to foreign interference, or if the complainant feels that some form of foreign interference or TNR may be involved, even if it's non-criminal on the surface, or whether they suspect that foreign state agent or a proxy is someone who has a formal relationship with a foreign state or an entity, or somebody who, what actually CSIS refers to as co-optees, an individual who does not have a relationship with a foreign state, but it is to varying degrees of awareness used by that state to further their interests. So these, especially the co-optees, present a very difficult challenge for us. So what we're asking our frontline officers to consider is that if they respond to a call where a reporting party suspects that they are being targeted by a foreign state or entity, either directly or indirectly, through activities such as intimidation, threats, harassment, assault, coercion, extortion, surveillance, and so on. It could also include theft of trade secrets, intellectual property, and sensitive information. Or if they determine that there are indicators of foreign interference, does gather as much information as possible and submit an incident report with a study flag that we've implemented for foreign interference specifically. I think we may be the first local agency to do this. And what the idea is that when the incident gets flagged, it gets immediately routed to my unit. Specifically the security section that reviews all of these incidents. And what we're also asking the officers is to categorize the incident type and victim type. So if it's a journalist, activist, politician, a member of the diaspora, notify their supervisor as well. And so when the incident comes to us, what we do is we identify and review every single one with much greater scrutiny, focusing on the likelihood that they're, whether the incident is tied to a foreign actor or proxy or a co-optee.
Okay.
We conduct a thorough examination of the foreign interference indicators and deconflict with our partners at the federal level. So one of the specialized tools that we bring to these investigations is that we ensure that there are follow-up interviews with by our trained intelligence officers, officers who understand the geopolitical climate unique to these countries. And we also conduct other types of investigations like cyber investigation, theft of trade secrets, and we also offer options to engage with victims of foreign interference. We have the ability to conduct covert interviews, for example, for those who are concerned about being monitored by a foreign state or some form of surveillance that we find that often brings comfort to the victims of reporting individuals. We also have technical teams that can inspect homes, vehicles, or devices for trackers or covert surveillance devices. This option has been exercised in the past, and it does bring some comfort to some of these individuals, especially political activists and dissidents, journalists. We also offer security reviews of their homes and businesses. And some of the practical things we do is we flag their addresses and their businesses so that if they should call the police again, they don't have to, keep repeating themselves with, complex, nuanced issues like this. And my unit gets immediately notified and we engage again.
Thank you. While we're talking, because you mentioned it, diaspora communities, I think it's a very important question, something that concerns a lot of people who are on this call. I'll start off, actually, John, if that's okay with you, if you're okay with continuing talking. We see that Canada's diaspora communities, which include obviously the Jewish, Iranian, Chinese Canadians, we've seen it with the Hindu community, the Buddhist community. They're often both targets as well as platforms of foreign interference efforts. Are you seeing any specific forms of targeting in your jurisdiction that targets these diaspora communities specifically? And how do you respond to protect vulnerable communities specifically?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question. Fortunately, York Regional Police has developed very robust and strong partnerships with all of these communities you just mentioned. For the most part, we've been very responsive to their concerns around these issues. To the extent possible, we've been very attentive, specifically my unit. We've encountered multiple instances of transnational repression targeting specifically the Iranian and the Chinese communities in the York region, and that's not surprising given the significant Chinese and Persian diaspora we have in New York region. And of course, these countries are authoritarian regimes with strong ties to each other and Russia. While they share common goals in using foreign interference, each sort of employs slightly different methods and approaches, reflecting kind of their own strategic interests and styles of influence. And their operations vary through, different levels of sophistication and efficacy. But of course, there are countries that, there are other countries that you haven't mentioned that are also engaged in foreign interference in Canada and in New York region. Specifically, what we're seeing is harassment and intimidation of political activists in the Russian, Chinese, and Iranian communities specifically. Online defamation campaigns targeting journalists again is a significant one. We've had cases linked to Operation Fox Hunt, where we believe Chinese authorities used the Chinese language newspaper to target an individual in Markham. One of the most significant cases we handled involved theft of trade secrets from a top-tier tech company operating in New York region. We suspected ties to China's Thousand Talent Plan. We advanced the investigation to the point that we could, pursuing actually theft of intellectual property and fraud charges because, there was great difficulty pursuing economic espionage. Oftentimes these cases are very similar in that you're not going to see a state actor the direct nexus to a state. So you have to be innovative and assertive in your approach. And so we did that, and I managed to get the help of the FBI, and subsequent to a very sophisticated undercover operation, they managed to make an arrest, which was great to see. The perpetrator is facing 10 years in the U.S. penitentiary currently. I'm very proud of that investigation, simply because the case really showed something important. And this is what I would like everybody to appreciate is regardless of whether a certain case meets the threshold for a federal investigation under Security of Information Act or economic espionage, we can still aggressively pursue other charges to disrupt this type of activity and at least making the operating environment here in Canada less permissive for this type of activity. So I think launching foreign interference operation in other countries often takes very sort of innovation and some flair. So it takes the similar type of approach to combat it.
Thank you, John. Neil, John mentioned something that I thought was interesting. He was discussing the targeting of political activists, and in recent months, protests in Canada have included overt support for Hamas, which is obviously a listed terrorist organization, amid concerns that some demonstrators may be directly or indirectly supported by hostile states or entities like Hamas. How do state actors leverage legitimate protest movements for their own strategic gain? And where does the security community draw the line between free speech and foreign manipulation?
Yeah, so we've seen time and again that foreign states try to exploit legitimate protest movements to advance their own strategic interests. That might include pushing propaganda, funding individuals or groups through protest, or amplifying narratives that divide Canadians. So the goal is to create tension. It's to undermine confidence in the government and to influence public opinion, often in ways that aren't immediately obvious. So from a security perspective, it's about identifying when the line's been crossed. So when peaceful protest is no longer just a domestic expression, but is being manipulated directly or indirectly by a hostile state, then that's where intelligence organizations feel that it's no longer just free speech. And the unfortunate thing is that these authoritarian regimes, because they have such control over their populace and they try to suppress any dissent, they see countries like Canada that allow this type of protest as an actual weakness that they can exploit. So this is where they try to take these same issues and use it to divide Canadians. So although many Canadians would feel that Hamas is a terrorist organization and should not be given any credibility, there are also a large population of Canadians who feel that what's happening to individuals in Gaza is horrific. So by taking a protest that deals with the Palestinian issue and turning that into something that divides Canadians by saying, well, really what you don't understand is what's happening to the people, as opposed to, well, what we need to do is get more funding for these terrorist organizations like Hamas. You will see individuals who participate in these types of protests who are of all ranges. So from one side that they feel they're being more humanitarian by trying to understand the problem, and then all the way to the other side of the spectrum where they're looking to find individuals who would be willing to participate in violent activity to basically push forward the agenda of these organizations. So whether it's like hostile regimes like China, Russia, and Iran draw most of the focus, we also have allied actors and it's international institutions that are also capable of shaping Canada's discourse through funding, media networks, and basically elite influencing. So it's all over the board.
Bit of a spoiler alert, because I wanted to ask you a question a little bit later specifically about that. I'll move over to Craig. Foreign governments, including, as we've heard from the US, or my first question to you, and as well as China, as we've heard, they're increasingly using trade policy and regulatory barriers as tools to pressure Canada. Do you consider these economic levers like tariffs and export controls a form of interference that can influence or destabilize domestic investment behavior?
I think it's a good time to take a step back and try and understand why the US is using tariffs in the first place. Because on the surface, any economist you speak to will say that tariffs are bad because they increase costs, they lower demand, and they could ultimately destabilize markets. That being said, I think there are three reasons in this case why the US is using them. The first is to increase funds in order to reduce their deficit. We know that's one of their goals, and it really is just a replacement to a sales tax that they don't want to put on. However, at the end of the day, their consumers pay this tariff. So it is a way of raising funds. The second reason is to protect industries that they deem to be of national importance. They've articulated aluminum, steel, pharma, semiconductors, and the auto sectors and I guess there are merits for wanting to protect those industries from a national security perspective. But most importantly, where I think the main focus of the tariffs are targeted is to counter China's counterproductive and anti-competitive trade practices. All the other countries, including Canada, that are being caught up in President Trump's art of the deal antics, but ultimately the enormous merits of free trade, and specifically the greatest trading bloc being North America, will come to fruition. While some sectors like manufacturing could be negatively impacted, ultimately free trade policies will surface because that's what's in the best interest of all parties, especially within North America. But hopefully we don't have to wait 4 years for that to unfold.
As sort of a follow-up to that, I mean, obviously this has highlighted some of Canada's dependency on certain markets and major vulnerabilities within a few of our key industries or key sectors. From your perspective, what long-term structural risks is Canada's economy are being revealed by this?
So I'll say that Canada is incredibly fortunate to be gifted with an abundance of natural resources, arable land, fresh water supplies, abundant coastlines, well-educated and technologically advanced workforce. But we're also lucky to be situated next to the greatest consumer on the planet. So Canada's welfare will always be hitched to our neighbor to the south, and that's a good thing most of the time. Ultimately, things will work out trade-wise between Canada and the United States, but Canada needs to stop holding ourselves back and reduce excessive reliance on the US, especially in the context of natural resources. So for example, in 2023, we exported more than 95% of our oil and gas into the US. A more diversified customer base and LNG, or liquefied natural gas, is a step in the right direction. that gives the ability to ship gas to Asian markets such as South Korea and Japan. That should ultimately benefit both Canada and the US. We also have to reduce our interprovincial trade barriers. We need to invest in infrastructure. We need to build pipelines to the coast to get the natural resources to the world markets. And we really just need to improve overall productivity. There's no good excuse for the productivity deficit between Canada and the United States. And if all of these issues are not addressed, Canada will suffer from a lower GDP per capita and lose relevancy on the world stage.
As a resident of Alberta, you're speaking my language with ONG and LNG, so I'm glad to hear. John, foreign interference is a shared threat, obviously, as we've mentioned, that spans local, provincial, and federal jurisdictions. From your position in local policing, what does effective coordination with intelligence, with national agencies, with other municipal agencies, what does that look like, and where do gaps still exist?
Another great question. So coordination starts with trust and early sharing of intelligence. And as I mentioned, we've built a strong ties with CSIS and RCMP, and we always deconflict at the earliest stages. But we're still facing some gaps. I mean, that goes without saying. It's a difficult job. There's a lot of agencies that need to coordinate. Intelligence flow isn't always timely. Classification of intelligence sometimes prevents the ability for agencies to share the information. Not all agencies have officers who have top secret clearance, for example, from RCMP. Again, the issue of threshold is very important. The threshold for mandates are not always clear. Both NCCOP report, 2024 report, and the Hague Commission 2025 report did address concerns about the lack of clarity regarding threshold for investigation of foreign interference in Canada. And they highlighted that the absence of clear guidelines and criteria for initiating the investigation into FI activities has led to inconsistent responses and potential delays in addressing the threats. So to me, it appears more at a discretion of the person maybe who is reviewing the file as opposed to a clear threshold, like a standardized approach, which really frustrates the victims of this type of activity from all sectors and communities. I've often said that those who are impacted by TNR and FI, at the very minimum, would very much appreciate someone who understands the impact of what they are experiencing, and not just, and they're basically just looking for an ally. You most recognize that our reach is limited when it comes to complex international relations and this type of issues. Because they also understand the issue of attribution being a key hurdle here. So this is one of the challenges where the whole of government response is difficult when isn't clear. There isn't a clear vertical integration of response from the federal to local law enforcement. It takes a lot of education and awareness, obviously, and intelligence sharing from across the country on this issue can be improved. We're often unaware of activities that are occurring for example, in relation to elections. Mm-hmm. Certain ridings across the country, we're unaware of some of the activities that happen, so we can adjust our posture here or be on the lookout for them. So I would say that's some of the gaps.
Thank you. Neil, you were touching on something briefly before, and I'll ask the question with context here so people can understand. While obviously hostile regimes like Iran and Russia and China, like we've heard, they draw most of the focus, you were mentioning allied actors, international institutions are also capable of shaping Canadian discourse through funding, media networks, elite influence, etc. Where should Canada draw the line as a nation between healthy cooperation and strategic dependence on foreign ideological agendas?
Yeah, so healthy cooperation is essential in today's global landscape, and whether it's intelligence sharing, trade, or multilateral diplomacy. But there is a definite and clear line, and Canada has to be clear-eyed about where that line is. When foreign partnerships, especially with powerful allies or international institutions, start shaping our policies, media narratives, or public discourse in ways that don't reflect Canadian interests or values, that's when we move into what would be considered more strategic dependence. So it's not just about hostile regimes. I mean, it does have to do, especially now with what's going on and with what everyone's talking about over the last couple of months since the Trump administration has come to power. We are seeing even trusted allies pushing ideological agendas that benefit them more than they benefit us. And that's why we need to focus more on transparency, independent policymaking, and strong national security lenses that are critical to shaping Canada's decisions going forward. Canada needs to engage globally, but always under our own terms and with our own interests. So a good example happens when we have individuals who talk about the 51st state. And for the majority of Canadians, that's something that would never be anything they would be interested in. But there are small pockets around Canada who may consider that as being beneficial. There might be those individuals who work in certain industries who see themselves as benefiting from becoming a 51st state. And the oil and gas industry is a good example of that. No, I'm not saying that every company that works for the oil and gas industry would be interested in becoming a 51st state, but you do have pockets within the West that see themselves more ideologically aligned with what's happening in different parts of the US than they see aligned with what's happening in all of Canada. So this can be used as a wedge that foreign states can use to basically crowbar their way in and try to make more division within Canadians, making them question, is my government making the right decision for me, or would I be better off trying to advocate to become more like the United States?
Thank you. We're getting close to our Q&A section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of you one last question. I'll start with Craig. Policymakers, they often talk about economic resilience. It's a terminology you hear used, but it's not always clear to people what that means in practice. What role should Canadian financial institutions and regulators play in mitigating the impact of these sort of foreign economic interference?
I wish I had a more detailed answer to this question other than continued education, global collaboration with regulators, peers, and competitors, especially on cybersecurity, fraud detection, and overall elevating risk controls. But one question that I haven't fully addressed is the economic impact of the tariffs on the Canadian economy. Currently, when you add up all the tariffs Canada is subject to, including the emergency 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, non-USMCA auto, as well as the reciprocal tariffs, Canada sits at about 17% tariff rate with the US. However, once all the paperwork is completed on USMCA eligible goods, Canada can get that down to about 10%. And then with renewed negotiation post-election, I can envision Canada getting down to about 5% plus or minus and call that an ally-friendly level. So at 5% tariff, Canada's GDP would be negatively impacted by a manageable 0.5%. At 10%, it would be closer to a 1 to 2% drop, which would be a painful slowdown and border on recession. And at 17-20%, Canada's GDP would be negatively impacted by 3 to 4% and definitely cause a recession. So I'm expecting the 0.5% slowdown scenario with hopefully some positive monetary and fiscal offsets. But then again, I am an optimist.
Good thing. We need more optimists. John, for you, the legal framework around interference is often reactive, right? It's often fragmented, as we've already talked about. What tools specifically would help frontline law enforcement officers, individual officers, respond more decisively to somebody calls and they say, I think X is foreign interfering with me. I walk us through how that works for an individual officer.
In terms of legislation, the government did finally make some adjustments to Bill C-70. If you had a chance to review that, it does allow for better information sharing to law enforcement by CSIS. It has readjusted, or I guess they came up with a new act called the Foreign Interference and Security of Information Act, FISI, that replaced the old one. This one, it has more specific language in it in relation to transnational repression. So, for example, Section 20 says an individual in Canada working on behalf of a foreign state threatening to harm relatives of a Canadian citizen who lives in the foreign state if the citizen does not stop criticizing the foreign state. So, or for example, someone residing in Iran who is not a Canadian citizen and has no other links to Canada, but is working for RGC, and let's say they're threatening violence against a major Canadian media company, like a CEO of a major Canadian company, to discourage them from reporting against that Iranian regime, excuse me. So that's specifically now in law. The only well, not the only, but one of the issues is that this is only the purview of the RCMP and not the local law enforcement. So this law necessarily wouldn't allow me to lay this charge, but it would allow me to refer the case to the RCMP for investigation.
Okay.
So that's a step forward for sure.
Okay. Thank you. The last one, Neil, is Craig touched on economic resilience. For you, policymakers and the public are beginning, obviously, to talk more about resilience when it comes to our intelligence in the face of foreign interference, but it's often left undefined. This is sort of a two-parter. From your perspective, what does true institutional and societal resilience look like in an era of narrative warfare and strategic interference? And should we be paying closer attention to diaspora-driven foreign influence efforts occurring within Canada's borders?
Yeah, so to take a look at what some of the issues are that we're dealing with when it comes to the way I'll take social media as an example. With social media, foreign states have basically gotten to the point that where they come to the realization that by manipulating algorithms, by finding the pressure points that most Canadians, and essentially what is a human aspect of dealing with what you're reading and how you'll be affected by what you're reading and what you're going to, they can manipulate these levers to basically put themselves in a better position so that their message is getting across. And that echo chamber of social media is becoming more and more of a tool that Canadians are having difficulty trying to disassociate from. Before we were so logged into what was going on in our computers and our laptops and our phones, a lot of information was being provided to us through old form media, which we had to actually read and find, and there's a lot more diversion there. Whereas the more that you click on something, the more you're going to continue to get the same messages. So if you're looking for those issues, you're going to continue to find those issues, and it's going to be in the narrative that might not necessarily be truthful, but definitely something that you may be looking for, and then you get manipulated by that. And I'm sorry, can you just repeat the second part of the question again?
One is I think it was sort of touched on briefly by John and you
Right.
yourself as well, but should we be paying closer attention? I mean, we as a state entities, intelligence, be paying closer attention to non-state or diaspora-driven foreign influence efforts occurring within Canada's borders from groups with
Yes.
that are involved foreign but are strictly domestic.
Right, and that's that's an issue that's very difficult, because when you're talking about individuals in Canada who have a let's say a view that doesn't quite match Canadian values, I'll use the example of certain religious or cultural representatives that see the current laws in Canada not being representative of themselves. One of the ones that I use that just comes to me quickly, because I did a lot of work in counterterrorism, so I obviously did a lot of work in Islamic extremism, is Sharia law. So Sharia law isn't necessarily something that is a foundation of Canadian values as we see them now, but you could have third, fourth, fifth generation Canadians who have no association to any foreign state and have no association to any terrorist organization, yet they would be advocating for Sharia law, and they might be trying to manipulate the decisions of individuals who are running for certain candidacies in that riding to agree with them on that. If you have a population of individuals who are voters and are from a certain diaspora and they are looking at Sharia law as being something that should be implemented in Canada, they could try to manipulate the candidate who is running for whether it be a municipal, provincial, or federal election to agree with that and advocate for that. So there's a real fine line between what we see. The United States has always been equated to a melting pot where everyone kind of becomes more synonymous, and Canada has always been considered to be more of a mosaic. So you're allowed to keep your values, you're allowed to keep your culture, you're allowed to not even allowed, but basically, you know, you want to do that here in Canada, and Canada wants to be reflective of that. But there are still potential here for manipulation within the political system by individuals who are in a riding that might not necessarily agree with these things, but think that in order for me to acquire and maintain power within this riding, I have to somehow advocate for this.
Thank you. That's incredibly interesting. So I've never been known for my time management skills, so I do apologize. We seem to have gone a little bit further than I thought before the Q&A. I do have some Q&A questions that have come in. So the first one, Craig, is for you. What can the everyday Canadian investor do to protect their savings, et cetera, from tariff-based, or I think we've talked about more than tariffs today, just the uncertainty in general of the economy?
So this is a tough one to give on an individual basis, but it is always good advice to not look at day-to-day market gyrations because the volatility will drive you crazy, and instead take a longer-term focus on investments. Think about if you're worried about the volatility in your portfolio, you probably have too much risk, but don't panic sell, move to cash, because investors don't get back into the market when that happens. There's plenty of studies that over the last 20 years, if you missed the best 20 days of the market, that you would have missed out on 100% of the return over that 20-year period. And we know the best days are lined up right next to the most volatile and the worst days. Yeah, the point of the story is don't try and time the market. Stick with a level of risk and volatility that you're comfortable with, and don't pay attention because markets go up over the long term. Magic of compounding works.
Okay, thank you. The next question can be either taken by John or Neil. It says, how vulnerable is Canada to a cyber attack from a foreign adversary?
Sure, I could take. You want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, well, I mean, cyber threat is increasingly becoming a significant issue, and I don't think that's news to anybody. But we've had instances of cyber attacks from all around the world here in Canada, targeting our critical infrastructure. And as some of you may be aware, that upwards of 80% of our critical infrastructure is either owned or operated or both by private sector. That presents its challenges as well in terms of reporting. These private companies have obviously their own business interests, and they may not report some of these attacks, which prevents law enforcement and intelligence services from responding to them more effectively the way they should. So having said all that, I think cyber resiliency is really important for all of government institutions and the private sector. I don't think that all institutions have appropriate cyber measures in place in terms of immediate action plans, contingency plans, to ensure that the threats are quickly isolated, that business continuity can progress. We've had attacks on hospitals. We've had ransomware attacks on government institutions. So yeah, I would say that's a significant threat to Canada for sure.
Thank you. And the last question here, Neil, it's sort of a big one. We've kind of touched it a little bit today, and this person's asked a question that's very specific to a group. It says a lot of exposure to the threats posed by Russia, China, Iran. However, what is the threat posed by the Muslim Brotherhood and their Qatari backers to our democratic institutions, universities, banking, security, etc.?
Yeah, to go on something as specific as that, it's difficult to say. There is definitely going to be a continued issue. When we look at foreign influence and we look at concerns coming from different parts of the world, it is usually based upon what threat do they pose to us because of their ideology versus our ideology. One of the bigger issues that we have is that, other than Russia and China, looking at it from a geopolitical aspect, if you have a group that is both political because of the Qatari connection and also religious because you're talking the Muslim Brotherhood, you have almost a force multiplier now. So you have a country that could be trying to put on somewhat of a political influence, and then you also have a group of individuals who are focused on their religious interpretation to also be a threat. So you're looking at it from multiple perspectives here. You're looking at it not just from the perspective of, okay, well, what could a country that has a geopolitical concern with Canada or threaten Canada in a geopolitical way, but also a number of people who may not even associate with this country, but now also share a religious belief and may be involved in terrorism issues. So you're looking at it from multiple perspectives. And as John just talked about, it's not just China, Russia, Iran, but there are terrorist organizations that do have a capacity to try to interrupt critical infrastructure in Canada. And I'm not just talking through terrorist activity, but through cyber attacks. So, and that is becoming more and more of a potential threat to Canada. It's not just the individuals that are working for a host nation. It's individuals that are actually having access to artificial intelligence, and they're using that to break code that would affect Canada's water purification, that would cut into Canada's energy infrastructure. So there are a lot of threats that are coming from a lot of different areas, and I give a lot of credit to the Communication Security Establishment, CSIS, the RCMP. Everyone is doing their best to try to ensure that none of those things happen, but the sheer number of potential threats to Canada makes it a very difficult job.
We didn't really touch on AI in this so far, but you did bring up a good point. Maybe I'd just like to sort of do my own Q&A for a second here.
Mm-hmm.
The AI in a lot of ways has somewhat leveled the playing field so that groups that wouldn't have had the resources or money or whatever to be able to launch an attack on Canada now do. And how is groups like CSIS, CSE combating that?
I think like everyone else, they're just trying to keep up with the pack. We're seeing that AI has provided a tool that whatever your imagination is, and like any other tool, can be used for something that's so beneficial to so many, but at the same time can be used by individuals who are trying to cause harm and havoc, can be so detrimental. So as much as AI is trying to ensure, the individuals that are basically coming out with the programs for artificial intelligence are trying to ensure there are safeguards and guardrails with these programs, you're hearing it on almost a weekly basis that someone has cracked the code to ensure that, hey, if I want to find out how to build the next super virus, I'm going to learn how to do that by saying, oh, wait, I'm really pretending I'm going to be for an actor in a movie, and my actor is a biologist who figures out how to come up with a super virus. What type of terminology would I need to use? And then they go down that algorithmic rabbit hole of finding out exactly what they would need to use to build the next superbug. So,
I'm sure. We're almost out of time, but I'm sure quantum computing as well. I mean, its ability to crack security is significantly higher than anything we've had before. So that would also play a part. I'd love to sit here and talk about this all day. However, that is our time. So I want to give you guys a thanks. And before we turn it back to Aubrey, I want to thank all of you for your insight and clarity. I think, John, I think it was your very first question. You said this isn't hypothetical, and Obviously, what we've discussed today, it's not hypothetical, it's not theoretical. These are things that are unfolding in real time. They're affecting how Canadians understand our democracy, our economy, how we understand each other. And the only way to build real resilience is through awareness, collaboration, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. And I hope tonight's conversation leaves everyone with a deeper insight and sharper questions, and that it sparks further conversations in your own communities and networks. And I just want to express my sincere thanks to you guys for being on this call, as well as the B'nai Brith Canada staff who worked behind the scenes to make this evening so wonderful. And your support makes events like this possible. So I'll pass it over to Aubrey for some closing reflections. Thanks, gentlemen.
Great, Austin. Thank you very, very much for hosting things this evening. You obviously have done a wonderful job. Before I close off, if I could ask the three of you if you have any last comments, any points that were not made this evening that you would like to make briefly, it would be wonderful. Craig?
I would say that in the here and now, the volatility does seem scary, but when you zoom out and focus on the future, things are going to be just fine.
Neil?
I'd like to reflect that. I mean, every generation has its own set of challenges, and we always feel that we're being presented with challenges that we've never been presented with before, yet we always find a way to overcome those issues. And usually that's through cooperation, education, and shared values. And this is an opportunity to do that tonight. So thank you for the opportunity to allow me to participate in this.
Thank you for your time. And John?
Yes, first I'd like to thank you, Aubrey, for the invitation, and B'nai Brith for hosting this conversation this evening. I think I have a very it's rare that I get a chance to engage with the public on these issues. So I think every time we get a chance to have the frank discussion like this, it's advantageous to the public, because the public needs to be aware of these threats in order to guard against them. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, as we move towards our closing, I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, for a very informative, sincere, and detailed Zoom and YouTube chat. Your unprecedented work and discussion of facts and truth is appreciated by all Canadians, especially those that are online with us this evening. All the Canadians that have come to this fine country to ensure that they would find a better life for themselves, their children, grandchildren, and future generations. It's gentlemen like yourselves that assist us in allowing the next generations to live and enjoy that life. So our most sincere thanks, and a special thank you to all of tonight's attendees from right across Canada. As we resume our monthly Fireside Zoom chat and YouTube events, we at B'nai Brith will continue to inform you of our dates and our special guests. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and let's all pray for light to overpower darkness during these difficult times. We will see you at our next Fireside Chat, and good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.